All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we are unpacking the massive historical weight behind one single, absolutely legendary name, Ramesses II. And make no mistake, those two words carried the weight of an entire empire. We're going to deconstruct exactly how a single name can encapsulate an entire era of human history, serve as a masterclass in ancient propaganda, and provide the very blueprint for absolute power. But before we break down the name itself, we've got to ask ourselves, what actually makes a pharaoh great? Throughout the millennia of ancient history, hundreds of monarchs wore the crown, claimed divine right, and eventually just vanished into the sands of time. Many left behind nothing more than a broken piece of pottery or a half-erased carving. Yet a tiny, tiny fraction of them achieved a level of fame that persists thousands of years later. So what is that dividing line? Is it pure luck? Is it simply outliving everyone else? Or is it a highly calculated strategy of legacy building? To truly reveal the man behind the monuments, we're going to follow a clear path today. First, we'll meet Ramesses the Great. Second, securing the throne. Third, the warrior pharaoh. Fourth, monuments and architecture. And finally, an enduring legacy. Okay, Section 1, meet Ramesses the Great. Ramesses II. When you hear that, you aren't just processing a name, you're experiencing an ancient brand. It's a legendary identifier that was meticulously crafted to inspire awe, fear, and ultimate respect. The legend has grown so vast over the centuries that separating the actual human being from the mythological god-king he presented himself as is honestly one of the most fascinating challenges in all of historical analyses. He represents so much more than just an individual. He literally defines an era of ancient supreme rule. He wasn't just a king who ruled during a specific time period. His reign was so dominant, so culturally saturated, that he basically became the era itself. When we say his name, we're invoking the absolute zenith of ancient royal authority, a time when the word of one single person was literally considered the divine law shaping the known world. And here's the really crucial point, that Roman numeral. Being the second inherently implies a lineage, a predecessor, and with that comes the immediate pressure to surpass them. Think about the psychology of that number for a second. You are not the founder. You're the sequel. You are stepping into a position of power that someone else, your direct bloodline, established and defined. The I is a constant looming reminder that you have massively large shoes to fill. It creates this incredible internal and external pressure to not just maintain the status quo, but to go bigger, bolder, and louder than the person who came before you. Moving right along to Section 2, securing the throne. Every single ruler who bears a title like this has to navigate a universal sequence to transition into an absolute monarch. Step 1, establish lineage to prove your divine right. Step 2, ascend to power, which means navigating some serious political danger. And Step 3, consolidate that rule by eliminating rivals and securing absolute loyalty. And that final step? It is perhaps the most difficult, because once you're on the throne, you have to quickly and decisively convince the populace that the gods actually favor your reign. So, I really want you to think about how difficult it is to step out of a shadow and become a legend in your own right, especially when you literally share your predecessor's name. It's a profound dilemma. If you change too much, you risk alienating the very establishment that supported your family. But if you change too little, you're simply a caretaker, entirely forgettable. A successor has to find a way to hijack the established narrative and amplify it to such a huge degree that they become the definitive version of that name. Which brings us to Section 3, the warrior pharaoh. To be remembered as a great pharaoh, you couldn't just sit comfortably on a throne. No way. They had to aggressively pursue strategic martial roles. We're talking defending established borders for just baseline survival, projecting power outward for pure intimidation, and establishing absolute military dominance over rivals. This right here is where legends are born. The ancient world was fiercely competitive, and the primary currency of respect was military might. You had to physically lead armies to prove your divine mandate. And this brilliantly illustrates the tension between propaganda and reality. On one hand, we have the warrior myth, the unbeatable divine conqueror single-handedly striking down enemies, exactly as it was carved into temple walls. But contrasting that is the historical reality, a really complex web of stalemates, shifting borders, and pragmatic diplomacy. What makes a ruler truly powerful is their ability to engage in that complex diplomacy while simultaneously and successfully selling the myth of total unyielding victory back home.
Let's shift gears to Section 4, Monuments and Architecture.
When we think about the chronological arc of his reign, it's wild to see how building projects completely anchored his power. In year 1, the focus is purely on survival. But fast forward to year 20, and we enter this era of massive, massive monument building. This requires immense economic stability and a literal army of laborers and artisans. By the final year, after an exceptionally long reign, the landscape itself has been entirely transformed. A long timeline allows a ruler to literally reshape the earth to bear their name. Let's break down how the different facets of a pharaoh's identity were actually translated into solid stone. When acting as the builder, the lasting symbols are massive temple complexes, places of worship that also served as administrative hubs. When projecting the role of the god, they relied on colossal statues, physically looming over the populace. And as the ruler, the focus shifted to fortified cities, protecting the empire's wealth and borders. Every single architectural choice was a deliberate, calculated projection of a specific type of power.
You really have to understand that in the ancient world, a colossal statue wasn't just pretty art. It was a loud, unignorable message of supreme authority. Today, politicians use social media, television, and press releases, right? But thousands of years ago, they used thousands of tons of stone. By carving your name and image deeply into the bedrock across your entire empire, you were broadcasting a constant, silent message to every citizen and every foreign visitor. I am omnipresent. I am immovable. I am forever. It is arguably the most effective political propaganda campaign in human history.
And that leads us to our final part, Section 5, an enduring legacy. A legacy like this is basically a giant pie chart of surviving evidence. 40% of this enduring legacy is rooted in physical monuments, those statues and temples we just talked about that simply refuse to weather away. Another 40% is the mythology and titles, the stories, the great monikers, the divine narrative that became totally ingrained in the culture. And surprisingly, only 20% rests on the actual written historical records of day-to-day governance. The grand narrative and the heavy stone have overwhelmingly outlasted the administrative paperwork. Ultimately, those two words, Ramesses II, are enough to completely encapsulate an entire era of human history. We've seen how this simple sequence of letters and a Roman numeral represent fierce political maneuvering, military strategy, massive economic mobilization, and unparalleled propaganda. It is a true testament to the fact that when a narrative is built with enough scale and ambition, the name alone becomes a historical institution. It leaves us with one final, truly fascinating thought. If he could see how we interpret his monuments and his name thousands of years later, would he feel he truly achieved immortality? We dissect his strategies, we analyze his propaganda, and we place his monuments in our history books. He is no longer a living god king, but he is undeniably a permanent fixture in the human story. I hope this explainer helped you see the incredible depth hidden behind this legendary name. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep asking questions about the history hiding in plain sight.